Alright, Logic fans, welcome back to our second video on section 6.5, where we're introducing the new rule, Existential Instantiation. Let's take a look at this problem. You've got a premise here, got a ton of quantifiers, and this is essentially a problem that gets you to practice, your skills with building sentences. So, if we take a close look at the premise in this case, you get X, Y, Z, F, G, H. And here you get Z, X, Y, and then you've got Z instead of the X, you got X instead of the Y, and Y instead of the Z. So it's asking you to sort of flip around the individual variables in the sentence, and that's all that's going on. Everything else is the same, not FX, right, GX, or not HY. Okay, so all of that's the same, and you have to flip it around. The way to approach this that I really want to insist on is you can take a hard look at your conclusion, which we have right here, okay, and you can kind of reverse engineer it. Okay, imagine my conclusion stripped of all quantifiers. I take away this quantifier, the Z occurs here. What do I get? Let's make our Z V3. Let's make our X V1. Let's make our Y V2, okay? And you strip them all the way down, right? And what do you end up with? You end up with a sort of situation like this, where you have this guy, but you just have your V2 in this place, right? And so what we're really looking for when we're working with this premise here is we're trying to get to something like this. And so the idea is okay, can I build something like that so that I know where everything goes, and then can I build this sentence back up from this guy, which is what I'm really trying to get. So pause now and give that a shot. Okay, so hopefully you were able to figure this out, but basically what we want to do is we want to systematically strip these quantifiers off using existential instantiation. So we remove this one and we instantiate this, right? And what are we going to instantiate to? Well, I instantiated it to V, but you could have gone to V3 since that's what you're looking for here, but as long as you keep it all straight, that's just fine, okay? And what you're left with is another existentially quantified sentence that looks like this. Right? And so then we're going to existentially instantiate this sentence. This quantifier comes off. It comes here, so instead of V, we'll go to V1, right? And you're left with another existentially quantified sentence that looks like this. And notice it's not the same one. V1 does not appear on a previous line. I could not have gone to V because it occurs in the previous line, namely right here. Okay? And then I strip this quantifier off, existentially instantiating, and I get a V2, which does not occur in a previous line. And so now I'm left with the thing that roughly I was trying to get when we were reverse engineering the conclusion. And so now it's a matter of just building it up the right way. And we notice that it's Y, X, Z. So we're going to have Y, X, Z built up in that particular order. And then we have to just be careful about which ones which one of these existential pseudonames we instantiate each time. So looking at the desired conclusion that we're trying to build, we know that the Y occurs on the H, so I'm going to do the V2 here, okay? And boom, existential generalization on 4. Then I'm going to existentially generalize this whole thing, which gets me an existential quantifier out here, and it needs to be the X, because that's what we're trying to build, and the X occurs on the G, so I'm going to replace what the G was, which was the V1. So I replace my V1s. And now I need to add the final step, the Z, which replaced the last leftover one, which was on the F. And as we see here, the Z occurs on the F. And that's it, QED, and that is how you go through these kinds of procedures. Okay, so for this particular problem, this will be our last one. And remember, there's plenty of exercises in the textbook for you to really drill in this and get all the practice in. But I want to highlight a really important problem-solving strategy, and that is when you're doing syntactic deductions, always try to use existential instantiation as soon as possible. And to sort of explain why and make that point, I want us to look at this argument, and we're going to look at a case where we do not use EI as soon as possible, and we're going to look at a case where we do use EI as soon as possible. And we're going to see that if we don't use EI as soon as possible, you will not be able to solve the problem. But if you do use EI as soon as possible, you will be able to solve the problem. So let's go ahead and take a look at a situation where you do not use EI as soon as possible. And what you're looking at in this case is an argument with two premises, and it's got a bunch of quantifiers. You've got a universal, an existential, you got two universals here. You're supposed to conclude a universal, right? And imagine what this looks like stripped down, FU and HU, right? So that gives us an idea of what we're trying to get to, but you kind of have your pick. Should I instantiate this sentence first, or should I instantiate this sentence first? And maybe I could instantiate all of this first and then instantiate this, or maybe I should instantiate this one first all the way, including the existential instantiation. Let's take a look at what happens when you follow one plan of attack as opposed to another. Okay, so here we go. So on this plan of attack, the person decides to universally instantiate this sentence all the way down first. And there's not a problem with doing that as far as the rule of universal instantiation is concerned. These are all fine. So here what this person does is they universally instantiate the second premise here, and so they strip off the X quantifier, and this is all fine, and they go to a V instead of a U, and that's also fine as far as the rule of universal instantiation is concerned. And you might ask, why did they go to a V though? And the point is that they're looking at this, and they're looking at the first premise, and they notice that there's an existential with a Y on the G, and so they know that this guy is going to have to be a V here, and so to get similarity, they're instantiated to the V here. So they're kind of looking ahead. They want this to be the same as this, and since it's existential there, that's going to end up being a V. So they're like, okay, I'll just go ahead and put the V there, and that's actually really smart thinking and planning. And then they universally instantiate that down to the U there, okay? Then what happens is they turn and they say, okay, now I'm going to break down my first premise, so I'm going to strip it of quantifiers. All right, so I take off the X here, my F goes to U, I'm left with this guy here, and that's fine. And then I'm going to, so that I have the similarity, I'm going to have the V here, okay? Well, you can't do that because the V has already occurred in a previous line, namely up here, okay? So now what I want you to do is, having noticed that, so this just, you can't do that, right? And so the proof kind of stops. But now what I want you to do is I want you to come over here and follow the strategy of using EI as soon as possible. And so that means you're going to instantiate this, and then you're going to instantiate these guys in line 2. So following that correct strategy, go ahead and see if you can't crack this problem. Pause now. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get it, but basically what we have here is the person universally instantiates this first, trying to get to that EI as soon as possible, right? And so they strip off the first quantifier, leaving them with this, okay? And then they also planning ahead, you know, they've got the V here, so that's completely broken down. And then what they decided to do was just sort of calm and simp it apart, just so that they had it all ready to go. So all of that's fine, and they've kind of exhausted the first premise at that point. Now they turn to the second premise, and now they're going to start instantiating that guy. So they universally instantiate the first one, and they go to V, which is perfectly fair and legal, and it doesn't matter that V has already occurred in a previous line, because now you're universally instantiating it, and it's only the existential instantiation that requires that the V not occur on a previous line. Universal instantiation, right? This is a universal. It applies to everything, including that V up here, right? So universal instantiation does not carry the proviso that it can't occur on a previous line. Only existential instantiation carries that. So now we're perfectly ready to go to the V here and set up the combination on the G, right? And then we universally instantiate that, and we're left with these guys. And notice, you know, this just sets up a really, really nice modus ponens between 7 and 9. We're allowed to build our FU and HU, which is what we want if we consider the conclusion completely stripped down of quantifiers. And then you just universally generalize that, and that is QED. All right, logic fans, so keep that in mind. Try to use your EI as soon as possible, because Universal instantiation will allow you to go to a V multiple times, even if it's in previous lines, but EI will not. Keep practicing those problems, and we'll catch you on the next video, logic fans.